Today I'm going to tell you why I think a dual sport adventure bike is the best bike to buy. Hi guys, and welcome back to My Adventure Moto. Today I'm going to be talking about my motorcycle journey right from the start, talking about the bikes that I've owned, the lessons that I've learned, and ultimately what has brought me to where I am today and what bikes that I have. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that little bell button to be notified of the next video. I've always been into bikes ever since I was a kid, but was never allowed one. Mum and Dad always said, "You're not having a bike." So fast forward all the way through to 2015, and I was 23 I think at the time, and decided that that was the time that I was going to get a bike. I went through the normal protocols of lessons and tests. I did my 125 test, and then your theory, your mod 1 and your mod 2, and finally got my direct access full big bike license. It was at that time that I thought, right, I need to get a bike now. What do I go for? I looked at lots of different bikes ranging sort of between the 400 and 700cc. And eventually I settled on a Yamaha MT-07, which for me was kind of the perfect bike to start with. It was not very fast, it was nice and light, it was comfortable, it sort of ticked every box for a first bike or a first big bike. When I picked up my MT-07, I'd ridden 125s for a few years. I'd done my big bike test obviously, but this was the first experience that I'd have of owning a big bike and really getting to grips with it and learning how a motorcycle actually works. It was a nerve-wracking start, but I was pretty keen to jump straight in and crack straight on. So I had my MT-07 for about 4 years, absolutely loved it, and thought it was amazing. Fast forward through to 2020, we were in the pandemic, and for the first time I think I've ever seen, the UK was seeing the best weather it's ever seen. We had 2 to 3 months of 25 to 30 degree weather, sunshine all day. There was very little work going on at that time, so I was pretty much sitting in the garden and riding a motorbike because that was all you were pretty much allowed to do. And it was at that time that I thought, okay, it's time to swap it up. And I was looking at all sorts of bikes. I was looking at naked bikes, sports bikes, touring bikes, cruisers, everything. And I remember back in 2019 I was lucky enough to ride from Venice all the way down through Tuscany to watch the Mugello MotoGP, and we rented a Yamaha MT-10 and a Kawasaki Z900. So for me, having an MT-07 for 4 or 5 years, I kind of thought it was a perfect step up to have that MT-10. So that's what I did. I went and bought an MT-10. I drove to Norfolk, or a friend drove me to Norfolk, picked up my MT-10 and rode it back. And it was awesome. It was just as I remembered in Italy. It was fast as it was comfortable. It had a few extra bits that my MT-07 didn't, like cruise control, a bit of extra spec. But it was amazing. And I had that bike for all of 2 weeks. I got to the point that something just wasn't clicking. It was fun, it was very fast, but that was about it. There was definitely something that wasn't sitting right with having a naked bike. I'd had one for 4 or 5 years before that, and I just kind of wanted something different. And one day I was out on my MT-10, pulled up at the traffic lights, and the guy on a Harley pulled up next to me, and we was just sort of chatting, and he says, "This is the bike you want." So that afternoon, I'm a pretty indecisive person, went home, sold the MT-10 and bought a Harley Davidson. For as long as I've been into bikes, I've been a fan of Harleys. I've always thought that they were probably the coolest, the meanest, the noisiest bikes on the road, and there was just something about them. And I think the fact that they've been in business and making motorcycles for nearly 120 years speaks volumes of the brand and the products that they make. So I had picked up a 48 Special, which I love the 48. It still is one of my favourite bikes to date. I think it just looks amazing. So picked up my 48 Special and absolutely loved it. Got straight onto changing the handlebars, just doing a couple little bits like that just made it look and feel a little bit nicer. And I rode that bike all summer with my mates and loved it. There is something about riding a Harley Davidson with 30 other guys on Harleys roaring down the street. The one downside with having a Harley 48 was the fact that the tank only did 60 miles. So it was kind of a bummer. You'd be riding and you'd have to stop two times a day, something like that, if you wanted to do a day on the bike. So whilst I love the bike, I was thinking this isn't quite as practical as I'd like. So then I swapped that in for a Harley Sport Glide, Softail Sport Glide, which was epic. I think it was 1680cc, something like that. Amazing bike, and it came as standard with the panniers, with cruise control, with a few extra bits that made riding a Harley a bit more practical. Again, I did a couple of bits to it, changed the handlebars just to make it a bit cooler, let's be honest, and a little bit more comfortable. And I had that bike for a year and I really did love that bike, but I got to the point where I would ride it for maybe 30 minutes, maybe a couple of hours at max, and I was absolutely knackered. I felt like I'd been hit by a bus every time I got off it. You got no wind protection, and whilst they are, I still think they are probably one of the coolest bikes on the road, something was missing. I wanted something that I could go on adventures, to experience new places, to ride to Wales on for a weekend, to ride around Scotland, maybe even to go down to the bottom of Europe, something like that. And I knew that on my Harley it would take me forever because I'd constantly be stopping, because I'd be sore, I'd have a bad back, I'd get cramp, all this kind of thing. So that was all in 2020. In 2020, I had 4 different bikes. I had an MT-07, I had an MT-10, I had a Harley 48, and then I finally got my Harley Sport Glide, which I then kept for a year. So I've been thinking about having a dual sport, more adventure bike for a little while. I test rode a KTM 790 Adventure R a few years before, and then I was at the point that the Pan America just came out, so I test rode the Pan America, and that bike is amazing. There was just a couple of things with the Pan America that didn't sort of suit me. One being the budget, it was a little bit out of my price range, and 2, it was a big bike for what I was looking for. And another thing that I feel that it is missing, and it's something that now having on my bike, I personally find it quite important, is a quick shifter. A lot of people say they don't see it so important, but I think that the Pan America is missing a quick shifter for me personally. So I test rode the Pan America, I test rode a couple of the bikes, a Triumph Tiger 900. Again, that was very much in the running, but it was just budget for me. So then it came down to the KTM 890 Adventure R. Like I say, I wanted a bike that I could do 200 or 300 miles a day on and not be worried, not be sore. I wanted to experience different places, go for weekends away, and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I really do love about the KTM is the fact that it is pretty driven towards off-road. I am by no means an off-road expert, not in the slightest. I ride enduro every now and again, I do a bit of green laning, I go down some trails, but that's pretty much about it. 80% of the riding that I do is on the road, and I love the fact that the 890 Adventure R has all the settings and all the features to help someone like me to take it down a little trail and not feel like you're gonna get thrown off at the end and end up in a ditch. It's things like the mode settings that it has on there. So you've got your street mode, your rain mode, your off-road mode, and then rally mode. With the off-road mode, it's pretty basic off-road, which is exactly what I need. I don't really need to mess around with the slip or with the ABS or any of that kind of thing. I did do that once and I ended up having the slip down all the way down at 3, which is pretty much off, and the back end was all over the place.
Woo! Back end, once you come down.
But it was pretty fun. And it just gives you the ability to enjoy these things without really knowing too much about it. And that's the thing I think for me with this bike, it's made me realise that dual sport adventure bikes are probably the way to go. Whether you just want to crunch miles on the road, whether you want to do a little bit of off-road, alright, if you want to go and race around a track, it's probably not going to be the thing for you. But even if you're commuting or something like that, a dual sport adventure bike is a comfortable bike that's going to absolutely churn out the miles for you. If you're stuck about what bike to get next, and you're maybe looking at a few different types, maybe you've had a few different bikes over the years, I definitely recommend going and giving an adventure bike a go. The fact that you can still throw it into a corner, you can hit the motorways, and then you can even do a little bit off-road, I just think is amazing. I will always now have an adventure bike, and I will always have a love for Harley Davidsons and other bikes. I can't wait to the time that I've got enough money and a big enough space to have another Harley that I can just cruise down and go for a coffee and things like that. But an adventure bike will always be there in some way, shape or form. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that little notification button to be notified on the next one.